What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back, and Marvel just blew the doors off of everything we know about the Marvel Universe, and it's kind of crazy that it happened in a Storm comic, of all places, as fantastic as this comic is. So, what this does is this opens up in the Elysian Fields in the underworld in Marvel Comics. And for those of you guys who don't know where this is one of the cool things that we're going to be talking about over the course of this video. The Elysian Fields are basically the afterlife for gods and Romans within Greek mythology. And so this takes place after the Thunder War, but before the decimation of Biarritz. And so in effect, it takes place between the ending of Storm Volume 5 and the beginning of this run, so essentially off panel. And Storm is talking to Maggot here, right? And she asks, are such storms frequent here, Japheth? And he says, not really. They're supposed to be impossible in Elysium. And he kind of muses here, right? Maybe it's part of the whole no negative emotions allowed bit of afterlife and this paradise. But Storm just tells him, I suspect death gods may not be very fond of storm gods or anything that reminds them of the storm. And that's where they kind of go back and forth a little bit, right? He says, yeah, some pretty screwed up stuff must have happened here if they're trying to prevent us from having negative emotions. And he says, Hades and Persephone relinquished the throne of the underworld to their daughter. We were told that it's not nepotism, it's just monarchy. But regardless, Cronus deemed his granddaughter weak and tried to take control of Elysium from under the new queen's rule. For his rebellion, here lies the king of the Titans. So literally, Cronus was killed here. Now, this is not the mind-blowing craziness. That comes later, and I promise it's nuts. So she asked the question, how have you been though? And he says, I'm in paradise. And that's where we kind of start to get the bigger picture of what's going on here. Storm says, in the past 2 months, I have visited Valhalla, Helheim, and a host of other places. None is a paradise in the way that we usually presume. And so he asks her, right, you've been to every single afterlife realm. And she says, my new acquaintance, Shagar, seems to be very knowledgeable about the many pantheons and their realms. And so he asks the question, did you find Dr. Voodoo? And she says, no, he must still be alive somewhere, but I did find my parents. My mother continues to avoid my company. And so in turn, Maggot kind of cracks a joke. He's like, I mean, give her a grandkid, right? Parents love grandkids. They'll ignore you until you have a grandkid, then they come around all the time. They won't leave you alone. And she says, I did give away her ruby, the only thing she left behind for me, to secure medical services for mutants in need. She taught me about sacrificial giving, so I did not think that that would upset her. But enough about me, I want to talk about you. How are you? And he just says, if you took me away from here and brought me back to life, but it started a war between the underworld and Earth, would I be worth it? And Storm just simply says, I am dog tired of losing loved ones. To bring you back to life, I would war against every single realm in existence. And so before we get into Brother Voodoo, what we have to do is pick up at the end of issue number 2, the last story that we covered. That what ended up happening is that after the massacre in Biarritz, Storm had basically grabbed all those individuals who were there, who had basically survived the experience, and brought them here to her sanctuary. What it does is it gives time for the town to be rebuilt, restored, that kind of thing. The issue here is that you had a combination of humans and mutants. And as you guys know, humans and mutants get along like cats and dogs, living together, mass hysteria, right? Humans and mutants just don't get along very well at all. And so what happened is exactly what you would think happened, except it got worse. It initially started off as bickering between these two groups, but then suddenly a mutant was killed. Storm didn't initially know this, but then she discovers it. And what's really interesting about this is that for those of you guys who are familiar with the history of X-Men lore, it's very reminiscent of the prelude, the events leading up to the Onslaught saga, when a young mutant was killed on the grounds of the Xavier Institute. That's one of the things that just sent Xavier over the edge. And that's where you started going in the story of his frustration with humanity merging with Magneto's hatred of humanity. And that, of course, formed the Onslaught entity. It's very similar to this because Storm takes it as a personal affront, right? She says, dead, killed in my sanctuary. I am dog tired of losing people to meaningless death. Humans, mutants, you will continue to bicker and fight, leaving piled corpses in your wake. You were asked, who will inherit the earth? Humans, mutants, cohabitation, separation? No. In the end, death is always your answer. This innocent mutant killed by either an intolerant human or a mutant hoping to frame a human for murder. Games, sick games with an innocent life. Nothing is sacred to you. An army assembles itself at our doorstep, wishing upon us ruin and destruction, yet you would rather do their work for them. What more would you have me do? And that's where somebody appears out of nowhere and just says, that's easy, just give up, and teleports Storm away. Now, what this does is this switches over to the realm of the Orishas. Now, the realm of the Orishas are basically the realm or the pantheon of West African gods. We've seen them before. We saw them in the Thunder War, but this is where Jericho Drum comes into play, right? Because it says, killed, pulled out from hell, and forced to follow Slim's orders again. I can't smell anything over the stench of my own rotting flesh. I can't hold liquor in my burst guts, yet I've never felt more alive. Shedding god blood as the dead X-Men. Now, the dead X-Men here are new. This is their first introduction into Marvel Comics, and we'll talk about why here in a second. But that's when Brother Voodoo shows up. But Wolverine talks to him and he says, tell me, bub, do you think you'll be able to stay alive when Aurora finds out what you've done with her friend's discarded corpses? Or do you want her to find out so she can put you out of your misery? And the response of Voodoo is he says, I used to help a lot of people in my clinics and shrines back on Earth. The rich, the poor, the elderly, and the young. Their problems can vary greatly, but one thing they always have in common, one thing they all try to push further away, is death. Everyone dies, Logan. When it is my turn, I will accept it with open arms. And that's where Wolverine just says, look at me, right? Does it look like death is a rest in peace and glory? You've desecrated a holy place that's sacred to you. Dr. Voodoo, sooner or later, in life or in death, you will have to face the consequences of your actions. Now, here's what's going on here, and it's one of the things to keep in mind. So at the end of the Thunder War, basically the conclusion of Storm Volume 5 with issues 11 and 12, what we ended up learning was that Hadad, right, the god of gods, the one who was so powerful that it took the living tribunal to defeat him, that he had destroyed Oblivion. And so what ends up happening is Mistress Death, angry over the fact that Oblivion was killed, grabbed Brother Voodoo and then brought him in and turned him into her angel of death, essentially. Then it turns out she had grabbed any number of other individuals from the afterlife and turned them into her own personal army. The dead X-Men are an example of that. And so that was essentially the setup for the war above all. Mistress Death is launching a war against the gods and even the cosmic entities. It's kind of crazy. I was having a chit-chat with Murira, the guy who's writing this comic, and he was talking about how chaotic and how insane this whole storyline is going to get. It's why we've been covering it all this time, because I can't spoil anything for you, but I'm telling you it's worth it, man. And so what we do at this point is we switch over to Storm, and this is the mind-blowing part that I was telling you about, because Storm has been taken beyond the confines of the existing multiverse. But I want you to look at something, right? Look at what's going on here. Look behind her, right? Look what's there. What does that look like to you? Now, anybody who's familiar with this knows exactly what this is, but we'll kind of go through here for a second to give you guys a better chance to figure out what's going on, right? Storm asks, what is the meaning of this? What is this place and who are you? And this person just says, I'm sorry that I brought you here without asking first. Trust me, it's for your own good. And so Storm looks up and she sees a bird in the sky and she calls out to it thinking that it's Jean. And she says, how I've missed you, sister. But this person says, that is not the phoenix. That's the raptor. It turns powerful beings into building blocks for the wall. I would start running too if I were you. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. This is why I say Marvel blew the doors off of this. That is the source wall. Storm is in the DC universe right now. And I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds bonkers, right? But here's the crazy thing. Keep in mind, Marvel and DC are crossing over right now. So it's not outside the realm of possibility. It's not a fetch that Storm would be yanked away from her multiverse and into the DC multiverse. The real question to ask here is she gonna come across the absolute universe? Cause son, I'm gonna tell you right now, man, son, let me tell you something. If Storm ends up facing off against absolute Batman, absolute Wonder Woman, and absolute Superman, man, not even in hell would you see him. I'm gonna call it right now. She would dominate them all, and she would do it. She'd be, man. Let me tell you something. So, I'm sorry, I'm so excited, people. It's an event that hasn't even happened yet, but it's just so exciting if it were to happen. Imagine Storm facing off against them. Storm would dominate the absolute Trinity and be home in time for cornflakes, and there'll be no arguing that. Right, there will be no arguing that. I don't care what you say in the comments section. That's exactly what would happen. So, of course, Storm flees because this bird that she thinks is Jean Grey is the Cosmic Raptor. It was introduced in the Justice League comics in 2019 as part of the whole totality and the introduction of Perpetua and all that kind of good stuff. But what the Raptor does is it converts those individuals into people who were confined within the source wall, right? So if they were to be captured by the Raptor, they'd be screwed. Storm would be stuck here for all eternity. And so that's when she asks, kindly enlighten me how being hunted by a cosmic bird of prey is for my own benefit. And this mysterious person just says, you'll see, right? Just don't die. And so Storm ends up jumping over this waterfall. And so she asks, can you fly? And this person's like, what? And Storm's like, can you fly? And they keep screaming. And like Storm asks again, but they're like, I'm just messing with you, right? I can hear you just fine. And Storm's like, so? Can you fly? And they're like, no, right? I'll probably die when I hit the primordial amniotic fluid down below, and you'll be stuck here forever. And so Storm's like, fun's over, right? And that's where this person says, don't touch me. And she says, I'm trying to save your life. And they just say, you will end up ripping my suit. And so when they hit the water, that's where Storm goes to grab them. Now, here's the kicker about this. What this does is this indicates that this person is actually from the DC universe, because that's what would happen in the DC universe. Keep in mind, DC is a lot more grounded than the Marvel universe. So within the Marvel universe, you would simply just have Storm who would grab this person's suit and by whatever piece she possibly could, which would save them from hitting the water. Done and done. Whereas in the DC universe, what you would most likely see is that exact thing. It's why Superman usually cradles people from the bottom when he catches them, right? He doesn't just grab Lois by the arm as she's falling, because depending on how high she fell from, she might be traveling at terminal velocity. So if he just grabs her arm, the rest of her body's gonna rip off. Right, so it's one of these cool elements, right? If you kind of know how to look at these small little things. Not an absolute truth, but it is a cool little element, because once they're in the water, at that point, the Cosmic Raptor is just like, good luck, right? And just essentially races off. And Storm's just kind of like, well, that was definitely not Jean Grey. But in that moment, she grabs the astronaut and races out of the water as fast as she possibly can. And then as she's dragging this person, she's met by the fish, right? What's going on, guys? And Storm's just like, what's going on? And the fish is like, if it's not too much trouble, can you hop into my mouth real quick? It feels awesome in my mouth. You'll love it in there. And Storm's like, I think we're good, right? Thank you for the kind offer. And the fish is like, oh, I promise I won't eat you. I just want to know what you taste like. And Storm's like, oh, of course. Right? And if tasting strangers is customary here, I'll be back to make your acquaintance properly. And so, of course, she ends up getting this body out. She takes off the mask, and that's when she sees the face of her mother. Now, her mother's dead. Right, one of the things to know about Storm's mythos is that when she was a child, a plane crashed into their home and killed both of her parents. There was a story arc in X-Men Gold from Mark Guggenheim where her parents did come back momentarily, but they were basically resurrected by a dead god. When that dead god was defeated, her parents turned to ash and disappeared, and so Storm got a chance to say her final goodbyes. So it's not as though her mom just kind of disappeared out into the ether somewhere, never to be seen or heard from again. So the real question here is this actually her mom? Or is it someone pretending to be her mom? We don't have an answer to that question. But at that point, you switch back over to the realm of the Orishas, right? And at that point, the dead X-Men are facing off against Ogun, right? War god of metal. Now, one of the things to know about all of this, and I think this is a very important thing to specify here, within Marvel Comics, the Orishas, or the Voodoo, are based on a real-world religion in West Africa. Now, I will say I'm not overly knowledgeable about it. So within Marvel, the Orisha and the Voodoo are basically interchangeable terms, which is to say referring to one means referring to the other, but Voodoo is also referred to as a religion. I'm not 100% sure if that's how it works in the real world. I'm not overly knowledgeable about it. But it's one of the cool elements of Marvel because when you start going through their godly pantheons, you actually start to realize most all of the godly pantheons are based on some kind of variation of a real world religion. Very rarely are they just pulled out of thin air and just made up based on nothing. But the reason why I say all of that is because with everything going on in the Thunder War, and I'll leave it to you guys, would you guys be interested in a video that basically runs over all the godly pantheons within Marvel and where they reside in the here and now? Full transparency, it'll likely be a very chunky video, but let me know if that's something that you're interested in. I feel like the answer is going to be yes, but it would be pretty cool because we would be covering the Skyfathers and we'd be covering the Atlanteans and we'd be covering the Asgardians and the Greek gods and all kinds of cool stuff that goes into it. So let me know if it's something that you guys are interested in. But while this battle's happening, we get this monologue where it says, "You have seen gods race across your skies like shooting stars on their 8-legged horses and enchanted battle bucks. From the mouths of your demigod heroes, you have heard tales of your deities taking the shapes of beautiful swans and mountain snakes to seduce fair maidens. Your ancient texts keep records of how your planet has been many times defaced by their skirmishes, but you do not know of the Orishas. You have not heard of their many escapades, for they rarely venture beyond their realm. After the fall of the 7 omnipotent sky gods, the Orishas became wardens to their father, banished to his realm. He slumbered within its atmosphere." Now, let's kind of talk about this for a quick second, then we'll jump back into the comic. So as a quick and dirty explanation here about all of this, the Voodoo themselves, which again are sometimes referred to as the Orisha, are basically incredibly powerful. Sometimes they're referred to as humanoid beings, but by all standards of measurement, godly beings. Now keep in mind, there is a kind of hierarchy when it comes to gods in Marvel. It's one of the big differences between Marvel and DC. DC follows the Judeo-Christian landscape for the most part, right? Lucifer, the presence, who's basically the god of Abraham, Michael, so on and so forth. When it comes to Marvel, as most of you guys know, you've got the one above all, you got the living tribunal, cosmic entities that exist on a multiversal and universal level, and then it starts boiling down into gods of varying degrees within any one particular planet or civilization that exists out there. So the reality here is that the Voodoo themselves are not that dissimilar in terms of their form and function to the Asgardians, which is to say, yes, they're gods, but they're gods compared to the people that worship them. But in the greater pantheon of the most powerful beings that exist out there, they are not unstoppable by any standard of measurement. Someone like Franklin Richards could show up and just wipe them all out with the greatest of ease. They were spawned by an elder god. Now, a lot of you guys probably know about elder gods from Marvel Comics, right? We've talked about that before. One of the more notable examples of an elder god is Chthon, right? The being that's always seeking to take control of the Scarlet Witch or invade into the main Marvel universe, and there's other ones that exist out there. But you guys see where I'm going with this, right? That this is a group of gods that are worshipped within West Africa, but they are not quote unquote gods as we know them, just really, really powerful beings. But for those of you guys who were reading Spider-Man Miles Morales before Cody Ziglar's run came to an end with number 48, you guys remember a god by the name of Anansi. Anansi is a member of the Voodoo gods. He's a West African god. He's kind of a trickster, right? But seemingly in more recent years, Marvel has kind of removed him from that pantheon and just kind of made him the patron god of spiders to a degree. We are still seeing how that plays out, or hopefully we'll still see how that plays out. I really love that storyline, so I hope it doesn't end anytime soon. But the elder god who spawned them was a guy by the name of Baluku. Now, he's particularly important here. The reason why is because of the fact that in the face of this battle that's going on, where Ogun himself is basically obliterated, right? And even Brother Voodoo says that. Even my patron, Papa Legba, and his sorcerer supreme, Makeen, found you impossible to end, Ogun. Behold, the heightened might of the avatar of death. It's establishing that what the forces of Mistress Death have done here is basically wipe out what remains of the Voodoo gods, right? The West African gods. They're effectively all destroyed. All except for Baluku, because that's what we're told. Dr. Voodoo, the avatar of death in his reign of Orin and for Orisha souls, has awakened the sky deity who spawned them, an elder god of many titles, an elder god of many mysteries, an elder god who would demand bloody retribution for the slaughter of his children. And have no misunderstanding here. this guy is cracked. That when it comes to elder gods, they do have varying degrees of power, but by and large, all indicators in almost every single circumstance points to one absolute truth. If any one of these elder gods were to enter into Earth with full power, or if you travel directly to their realm and try to confront them at the height of their power, they're nigh unstoppable for most anybody out there. Even Doctor Strange readily admits this about someone like Chthon. But the fact is, this guy is more than enough power to obliterate everyone who's here. And so at that point, Jericho Drum does the only thing he can do. He tells Ilyana Rasputin, summon the immortal Wreckers. And that's what she does. She summons Null the symbiote god, Hadad the first storm god, and Gore the god butcher. Now, we are covering the Null comic, and as a lot of you guys know, Null is the current god of light. So what's going on here? More likely, and while we don't necessarily have a continuity being established here, most likely this takes place before Null returns at the beginning of his solo series. So at this point, he's likely still dead. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Kind of a massive cliffhanger. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.